Welcome to cebsar Talk. I am Evans Apia Kisi, the host of cebsar Talk. cebsar is Center for Better Society Advocacy and Research Africa. cebsar Africa is a non-profit organization that believes in a better society for all. We in cebsar Africa believe that a better society begins with you and I. Hashtag a better society begins with me. For more information, please log on to www.cebsarafrica.org. Please follow us on the various social media platforms: YouTube, cebsar Talk, Facebook at cebsar Africa, Instagram, cebsar Africa, and Twitter at cebsar Africa. Like always, today we bring you another interesting discussion on the ongoing ministerial vetting and appointments by the President of the Republic of Ghana 2021. The President of the Republic of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, has submitted to Parliament a list of names for the vetting and approval as ministers for the next government. We find in the list the majority who served in the previous government from 2017 to 2020. While most of them have maintained their positions, some have been elevated from deputies to substantive ministers, and others assigned new roles. The list also includes new entrants amidst a reduction in the overall size of ministers and ministries in comparison to the previous administration. In this episode of cebsar Talk, we interrogate, among other things, the ministerial appointments by the President and the ongoing vetting processes by Parliament. And to help us discuss this important issue is Mr. Marek Kofi Gane. He's a chartered certified accountant. He's a director of program in public financial management. He runs the MG Consulting Limited, a private executive coaching consultancy in Ghana. He's an international development expert. He's also a member of the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants. He holds a postgraduate certificate in microfinance for development from the University of Greenwich, England. And I'm sure for most of you also, you know, he was a presidential aspirant in the just ended 2020 elections. I must say that it's a pleasure to host you once again. Welcome to cebsar Talk, Mr. Marek Kofi Gane.
Evans, thank you for having me. Really excited to be. Always a joy to have these conversations with you. So let's have a good time.
All right. Thank you very much. And it's also a pleasure that you always make time to honor our show and our program. And we must say that we are happy. And there are a lot of Ghanaians who are watching you who also admire you for what you do and what you stand for. So I would start straight away. I mean, and perhaps maybe the first question would be, what's your impression on the current size of ministers and ministries proposed by this new government? I mean, we know there's been a departure or there's been a reduction. What's your impression? Are you satisfied? Are you happy?
Thank you for the question, Evans. I don't know whether to. I'm not. You know, it's not about me being satisfied. It really is about what is right for us as a country. So, I mean, now we're being told we're looking at about 85 ministerial positions, isn't it? And that works out to about one minister per 350,000 citizens if you peg it at 300,000 citizens if you peg it at 31 million Ghanaians. And I always like to look at these things from a very comparative perspective because it's the only way when you talk, people don't feel you just don't like the government's way of doing things. Because look, um, generally you would expect that uh, the ministerial size to population is anything from one minister to about 1 million citizens, because that's the general norm. That's what is reasonable in terms of being able to manage resources in a very efficient manner. And so if you look at the likes of Ethiopia, or let me just start with Nigeria. If you look at the likes of Nigeria, that has about what, 206 million citizens, and who has about 45 ministries and 36 governors. So roughly that's about 200, government positions, and that works out to about 1 million citizens to each minister. If you look at Ethiopia, that has I think about 114 million now. I know they have about 22 ministerial positions. So if you add, say, maybe one deputy, that's about 44. And that comes to, if my accounting is correct, that comes to about 2 million per minister. Who else do I remember? If you look at South Africa, is another big economy. South Africa, you're talking about 59 million the last time I checked. And I know they also have about 27, 28 ministerial positions. And if you double that for deputies, then you're talking about 56 thereabout. And that also works out to about 1 million to 1 million plus to each minister. And so when you come down to our situation where we have just 31 million, on that comparative basis, you would assume that something in the region of 31 ministers or 30 ministers would suffice for a competent, slim, lean, efficient running of government. In our case, it actually is 85 ministers, as we are being told. And don't forget, some may have 2 deputies, some may have just 1 deputy. So it could very well go beyond the 85 that we've been capped at. So if you look at it on that comparative basis, really, we can't say we're doing really great, because for me, that's a huge gap from 1 minister to 300,000 to the normal standard, which is 1 million, 1 million citizens to 1 minister that we see globally or around the world. Some even have up to 2 million in the case of Ethiopia, for example, which is quite remarkable. So it's not outside of the norm to be able to expect that anything between 30 and maximum 40 ministers should have been enough. And I'm talking about including deputies and others, should have been enough to efficiently run government. So that's really my view. I like to say these things with facts and not, because once you start conjecturing outside what is established norm and fact, people think you're just being political. But this is nothing to do with political. It's about running governments efficiently.
Wow, interesting thoughts out there. And I like the mathematics that you did, which quite fits very well. 1 minister to about 1 million people. And I mean, yes, you've demonstrated very well, giving examples from Nigeria, Ethiopia, South Africa, and the likes. But so again, then what do you say to those who would disagree totally with you and point to the Constitution by saying that, well, when it comes to appointment of ministers, it's good to have this ratio, this mathematical explanation to it, but the Constitution does not limit the number of ministers. So perhaps we shouldn't be talking about these numbers or these ratios, but rather the question is, if we can appoint, or if we would appoint 100 ministers, 200 ministers, and they would be able to deliver, then we should just follow the Constitution as it says, and not any mathematical calculations. What do you say to
Well, I mean, it's not about, look, the Constitution also enjoins whoever leads this country to look out for the best ways possible to get things done. And to do things in a manner that it is the citizenry ultimately that benefit the most. And so some of these countries we've talked about, except for the likes of, I think, Kenya and Ethiopia, I think Ethiopia, but certainly Kenya and I think Ethiopia, that have enshrined the number of ministerial roles that ought to be put out there. All the others do not, just like us. But most countries have found it really efficient to say, you know what, we can have X number of ministers. I mean, for a population of 31 million, well, 85 compared to Nigeria that has about 206 million, and I know they have 45 ministerial positions, and then I think 36 governors in all. If just look at that comparison and see for yourself, you would have thought that a country that big would have, exceptionally bigger, size. This is not really a matter of the Constitution provides no limits and therefore use the highest limits possible. That's not efficiency, if you ask me. Efficiency is largely about doing the most with the least possible. And so, if we can't think that way, and we want to blame the Constitution, yes, I agree that, I've always had this argument that I think the Constitution should be able to put some limits on these things, because in Ghana, it's almost as though efficiency only happens if the Constitution says it should happen. And if it does not say it, then we tend to always, take it to the highest limits possible. And I do think that genuinely, if that is the way we are going to go, then we should have a situation where the Constitution begins to put a limit to this, because one of the things the Constitution also says is that you can have as many deputies as you possibly think is reasonable. So if somebody has 3 deputies, it's acceptable and allowable for what? It's just, I mean, when you work in an environment where it's all about cost cutting, efficiency, and all the things, when you see some of these things, it boils you down, because you know very well there's a possibility you can get things done without this huge number of persons. It's not about the number of ministers that will make these things happen. It's the machinery and the efficiency of the public machinery that makes these things happen, not the huge number of ministers. I mean, people make the argument that, in the first year of the current president, um, he needed a huge number of ministers in order for things to happen, in order for big targets to be reached and all that. The question is, have those targets been reached? Really.
Great. I mean, we would see, but you just answered a follow-up that I would have loved to hear from you, whether you think that there should be a cap on the number of ministers in the Constitution. And I like what you
I
really
do
said,
think
that,
there should be a cap.
yeah, and so you've answered that already. And I like one thing that you said, that we live in a country where efficiency is largely dependent on our Constitution. So which means which it's not supposed to be the case. I think that I agree with you that we should not always necessarily look up to the Constitution to decide what exactly to do. We should be able to, also reason and say that this is efficient for us or not. Anyway, so but let's move on. And well, now we have the list, about 85 of them. It could even shoot up, as you said, and we know per the processes or the Constitution, Parliament would have to review and approve this ministers. What's your take on that kind of exercise that we have in our jurisdiction, where Parliament would, and it's ongoing, will come to issues pertaining to that, but just your view on that structure, do you find it as something which is good?
Well, I think it's reasonably good. I mean, Parliament is always going to have a role. I think it should always have a role in determining who eventually becomes ministers in positions that affect all of us. And so, being the representatives of the people directly, being a part of government, yes, they should have a role in who the people believe are the right people to run the state in the various capacities as ministers. So, Parliament's position in that regard has always and is always useful. What I do think, is very crucial for us to debate, and they should be open to debate from here onwards, is whether or not, and I'm not saying Parliament doesn't have skilled people in the various sectors, but whether Parliament has the full complement of insight into what happens in specific sectors in order to be able to drill these ministers properly so we know who is best for this sort of roles. It is something that is debatable. I mean, having said that, though, I do think there are ways around it. I don't know how the select committee goes around compiling its questions, but I would imagine that if they bring in some of the industry experts and all that, then they would have been given some support in terms of, raising questions with these nominees that are well grounded in the issues that are on the ground, with the issues that otherwise everything else is just going to be political talk or political lines of questioning. But indeed, we want a situation where when we are asking these ministers questions or nominee ministers, assignees, we want to ask them questions that are real on the ground issues. So I just hope that some of these questions have been inspired by people who are actually on the ground in these sectors. But on the issue of whether I think the structure is good enough, well, at the end of the day, it is still the president who appoints, who gives that appointment to whoever gets through. But it is Parliament that simply approves the people or vets the people to see whether this is actually good material or not. So I think it's a double-edged or even-ended sort of engagement. President appoints, but it is the Parliament that determines if they are fit enough for purpose. And I think they go through that a number of processes. So we know the vetting which is going on now. It doesn't end with the vetting. After the vetting, the committee actually has to recommend to the whole of Parliament to say, look, we've vetted all these people. We think person A should be accepted for minister role and person B should be. And then they actually, as a whole Parliament, they actually vote on that. I think it's a secret ballot. I'm not sure, but I think it's a secret ballot. They actually vote on that process. And I think there's a standing order 172 of Parliament, and I think Article 78 or so of the Constitution makes it clear all those structures together. So it's quite a very committed process. I think it's a very deliberate process. But for me, I think if there's anything I think extra needs to be done is to ensure that Parliament and the committee that is looking at these do get the input of real industry players to know exactly what are the issues on the ground so that they can query these things before people get into office. I think that is crucial. And it's crucial for me because so that even if the person hasn't thought about these critical things in those industries, they can begin to think about it. I mean, I've watched some of the interviews, the vettings, and ever so often you hear people saying, when I'm appointed, then I will do this. When I'm appointed, then I'll do this. As a matter of fact, I think some of those questions are basic things that they ought to know before sitting in those chairs wanting to be vetted for those positions. And it doesn't take much to know those things if you really want to know.
Wow, great. And I like the point that you said that moving forward, something that could be added would be to get industry players or experts in these individual fields or individual ministries to come out with questions so that it would help to test the competence and integrity of these people. So what do you also think? Others have also said that, especially those who are maintained, if we would have people set these questions, it's also not out of place that perhaps we let them have these questions already at hand so that they come to demonstrate to us how they are able to achieve some of the things that they are being asked, or particularly those who are being maintained in the same ministry, they are able to account to the people of Ghana very well. what they might have done in the past? Or would you see this also as a good strategy?
Well, to be honest with you, I mean, I see things a bit differently. I mean, in terms of accounting for what you're doing, I think that should even be an ongoing process. I've always said that we should have parliamentary sessions where on certain days of the week it is purely ministerial persons who show up in parliament to be drilled and grilled uh, by parliament on ongoing things that are happening. We don't have to wait till after 4 years when you are only being reappointed before we ask you, how did you do in your last 4 years? I don't think that's what accountability looks like. Uh, we have a very dynamic parliament in terms of its sitting capabilities. It sits regularly throughout the year. We should have situations where we can bring ministers forward and ask them questions. And if things are not going in the way we expect them to be able to correct them before a whole 4 year session goes by, and then we now start wanting to correct them. That's not how I see transparency and accountability working. To people who say that it's to give them questions so they can go, it's almost like saying, Evans, I am inviting you for an interview, but before you show up for the interview, here are all the questions I'm going to ask you for the interview. You know, lend them, get some friends to even give you the answers, and just come and pour them. But that's exactly what we are trying to test: whether you have insight into the sector you want to lead, or whether you have a clue what your industry or ministry has been doing all these years, or whether you don't at all. I mean, you and I have watched some of these vettings, and 4 or 5 ministries who have relationships with the operations, who have relationships with the financing, who have in relationship with things like the regulations of the whole COVID testing at the Kotoka International Airport. And not a single one of them has an idea, any contractual relationships between the government of our country and the company who is actually testing individuals. And that cannot be acceptable even. It cannot be acceptable. So, so if we say to people, oh, let's give them questions, let's tell them tomorrow when you show up, we're going to ask you about this contract that is happening at the Kotoka International Airport, where people are being exposed to a company that nobody seems to know anything about. That cannot be acceptable. Yeah, that's not the way we test people's competencies. It depends. It is different from trying to test people's aptitudes and all that. That's a whole different ball game. We can do that if people want us to test the aptitudes of persons, but to test the competency of a whole sector that we're gonna, hand over our country's resources to you to manage, you need to be up on your feet. I mean, we're not. I don't think anybody is expecting ministers designate to answer every single question squeaky clean, but it is an opportunity to demonstrate that you are either capable of managing that industry, or and this is the bit that people miss, or that you've got transferable capabilities from a different ministry that you can bring on board to benefit this new ministry you're being thrown into. So it's an opportunity to demonstrate capabilities, not an opportunity to show that you are 100% squeaky clean, and that you're 100%, fit for purpose. We can never achieve 100%, but at least let's see some level of competence.
Thank you very much. I like the very much ending, which I know would come to substantive issues to look at, specific vettings, but I like what you ended with, that, it's an opportunity to demonstrate your capability of, managing a ministry or transferring skills from one field to the other. And I guess with what you also said, perhaps then if we do regular, accountability check on ministers, this we could let them know that, well, after 3 months, 6 months, we feel that you should come to the floor to answer these questions. I guess in that case, then these questions perhaps could be given to them to prepare for the necessary documents. And this is something that as a country we could look at very much. Now, when you walked us through the processes of this vetting, and you talked about the fact that it would have to later go to the floor to be voted secret ballot, quoting Article 78 and the likes. Has there been a case where a nominee has been rejected by Parliament before? This is something people are wondering. It's only because looking at what is going on, people have started saying that, well, nothing would happen. And is there a case like that? Have you cited anywhere?
I think there is. I just can't remember what the names are, but um, I want to believe there is. It's an interesting question you've just raised. I've never really pondered over that, whether that process has actually seen a rejection of somebody before. But I want to believe it's something that may have happened. I genuinely don't know the exact answer whether it's happened before. I can't, because I can't remember anybody on top of my head that I can mention and say, "Oh, this man was rejected on this occasion." So I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens on this occasion. I think the excitement about this one is that quite a lot of people have been viewing. Quite a lot of people have seen some of the ministers designate being vetted. A lot of people have expressed the dissatisfaction about a few of them. So it'll be, and these are the people speaking. Don't forget, and these people are represented by the ministers. Um, and so, what will be interesting will be to see whether uh, our ministers do align with the mood of the people themselves concerning some of these designated members
Mm.
of cabinet. So yeah, I think it's something. But you see, I just want to raise. I know we mentioned earlier about the capabilities and all that of the designated persons, but I also want to say, and I think we need to say this so we can balance the skills, because it is what we have actually also seen, is that I think a large part of this vote vetting process also depends on the mindset of those raising the questions or those asking the questions at the vetting. You know, one of the things that has struck me hugely is that there seems to be a sense of trying to score some political points with some of the questions, because you hear some of the questions being asked and it's almost sounding like, I know A, do you know B? Or I know C, do you know Z? And for me, it's quite remarkable to see that, because my view about this vetting process is to say, look, we know what the status quo is in this country. We really know. We know we've been marking time for a while in some of the sectors. The mindset of questioning these appointees should be, what is the transformational agenda you are bringing? What is it that will move us from point A to B in the shortest and in the most efficient possible time frame? So, depending on the mindset you have in going into this vetting process, a lot will show in how or what questions you raise. Um, and so for me, it shouldn't be about, uh, trying to find out if people know something that you already know. It should be about, tell me what you know that I actually do not know. How can we move this whole ministry from A to B? How can people benefit from this agenda for this ministry that we've never seen before? What is so transformational that you are bringing to the table? And I know if you've been to interviews as a corporate person, one of the things you get told or asked is, what new are you bringing to this organization? And then for me, that should really be the driving point, because look, we know the status quo. So asking people whether they know something which is already a status quo, really, it doesn't add A or B to the whole transformation process we are seeking to get ourselves in the mood for. So that I just wanted to say that as much as it depends on the people being vetted, it also a lot depends on the mindset with which the people vetting the designator are also raising those issues. It has to be transformational, not a matter of I know, what do you know?
Okay, thank you very much. So questions should be more, focused on what do you add to the ministry, or what do you bring on board as a minister designate, other than. But Honorable, when you mentioned that it's also appears to be a forum to gain some political points, which we've seen going on. Some have also argued that, well, it's also not a bad idea because we need to check their temperament. And for a lot of people, they feel that if ministers get away with their utterances, be it as it may be bad, this is also a forum where they are asked, to retract or apologize. What's your take on that? Is it wrong that they are asked to apologize or retract on certain utterances that we feel as a minister of state, or certain actions that should not have occurred in the first place? What is wrong with that if this is the forum to get them to retract and apologize?
Well, it's almost like saying this vetting process is not about seeing what we can do to this country. It's about cornering you uh, to be able to apologize for things you ordinarily wouldn't apologize for. To me, it paints two very unpleasant pictures. One, it paints the picture that Parliament by itself cannot get its ministers to retract those statements if there wasn't a vetting process, and that's wrong. That's very wrong. If people have done something and they are members of Parliament, and Parliament that has a lot of disciplinary elements in it has not been able to correct these matters, and would wait until a vetting process when we know for a fact that every and anybody who comes to that vetting process would appear as the angel of light because they won the role. So, yes, I don't mind apologizing, because if that is all I have to do to get the job done or to get myself on the ticket, why not? But it also means that we should question the sincerity of those apologies, because you've had 4 years or 3 years or 2 years to have been brought to book to correct that error in your character, and you haven't until you sit in a position where your hand is in the mouth of your accuser. Yes, you would say yes. That's easy to do. If it's a trade-off, isn't it? Just saying I apologize and getting the job, it's easy. So for me, I think if Parliament or the members who are raising those questions are intending to get sincere apologies, a vetting, position time is not the time to do that, really. I agree, though, that we must raise questions to interrogate the character of the designated individuals, because that's crucial for their roles. Um, they are going to be working with people. Character will determine everything they do in those positions, and so yes, we must question or interrogate their characters. But this whole business where people are just being forced to apologize left, right, center is almost a witch hunting agenda, if you ask me. But hey, like I said, in Ghana, largely a lot we do is largely political rather than, state directed, citizen centered, and all that. So I don't know what it adds to the process. I don't know what it adds to determining somebody's competency or somebody's character traits. All I know for a fact is that if my hand is in your mouth and all you need me to do is to knock on the table 3 times to get my hand out of your mouth, it's easy. And it doesn't show, it would never show you my sincerity.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's also very inspiring over there. So clearly, it looks more like a bad precedence being set, when members of parliament or ministers of state are left to do whatever they want to do, and during vetting they are asked to apologize. Obviously they will, whether sincerely or not, but the answer is it's obvious. So I would like to read a few messages. If you are just joining us, There's a cebsar talk today. We are hosting Honorable Marek Kofi Ghani. We are looking at ministerial appointments and vetting in Ghana. So a message from Moses Malagan says, hello, Evans and his team. You guys are doing good job watching from Ghana. And then we have Houston Emmanuel says, I have been listening to the vetting. Clearly, the opposition on the committee seem to be asking vindictive questions to settle scores. Occasionally, though, with few policy-directed questions, whereas the incumbent asks questions considered soft and biased. I think it's time civil society organizations represent on the committee to ask questions are considered factual, unbiased, and policy directed. So I guess to add on to what you have said here. So, but let's come to it. I mean, we've already delved into it. You've given us a bit of your view on the kind of questions that are being asked and how some of the answers are coming up. But what's your impression on the vetting process so far? Any particular nominees that caught your interest and you feel has impressed you the most? Which of them? I mean, do you find them promising for Ghana?
Um, well, I mean, so far there's been, I think, just two people who I think have caught my eye, and I mean, they are not strangers. Yeah, they're people I think from afar have been quite impressive, to some extent. Honorable Edutum is one of them, the designated minister for education. I say that because I think he gets education. He understands education without a doubt. Um, I do think though that there's a bit more for him to grasp where the tertiary sector is concerned, and especially research and collaboration of this public tertiary institutions, because that's the way going forward for any university that wants to make its mark in the world. Not to stand as an island, but to get
If you could speak a bit up for us.
Oh, can you? Am I good enough now?
Yes, it's better now.
Okay. So I was saying Honorable Educhum is one that I think has shown well. And I was saying that I think there is still a bit more to do in his sector around tertiary education, especially where research is concerned, especially where collaboration with other universities are concerned. I think these things are very critical to enhancing the caliber of our public tertiary institutions. But overall, I think he's the one that has pretty much impressed me. There's also the Attorney General designates, who has also impressed me. I was a bit disappointed in his the section where he was asked what elements of the constitution he would like to see changed, and all he said was he would like to see changed the provision on the same provision actually we were talking about of ensuring that majority of ministers come from parliament. I genuinely do think he's trying to be economical with what he thinks should be done, because there's an awful lot in our constitution that needs to get really looked at genuinely. And so, I mean, other than that, in terms of performance, yes, I do think he's too much of his father's son in terms of being the president's right hand man, and whether that that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about how they shone on the day, and I think the two of them stand out for me.
Thank you. So then we'll be looking out for them. Why not any other two that you feel also didn't, I mean, stand out at all? I know you wouldn't want to be pushed, but
No. I mean, I think at this stage it's been obvious to Ghanaians. I mean, you watched it. We all watched some of this vettings. I was another one actually. I was impressed with was the I think is a minister of lands. I think is it lands? I think it's lands now. Can't remember the name, but yeah. I think that was yesterday or 2 days ago. That also impressed me a bit.
Mm.
But on to the two that I think didn't do. I mean, one of them is quite obvious. The Minister for Fisheries, we all know that, and also the Minister for Health. I totally. I mean, he's a fellow accountant like myself, but I was not impressed at all. I was
And
not
for
impressed
him,
at
I
all.
guess it will be more of the I'm not aware of the contract, right? Or beyond that.
It's not even. I think that's one thing because that's a major part of the control process of this whole COVID-19. We know for a fact that a majority of the new strains we are finding in country have come from that route, from the route of people coming into the country. And so it was exceptionally crucial that whatever is happening with the testing in that zone should be on your fingertips. You ought to know. And so not to know, I for me it was I felt it was a bit disingenuous because for me it meant only two things: either that he was lying about it, or he's protecting somebody, or he's not being transparent about either of them. And that cannot be acceptable. Especially so, you see, the way I look at these things is that there are 30 million of us who are putting our lives in your hands.
Mm.
And so to simply come and say I am not aware, it's not good enough. That's 30 million people whose lives are in your hands. They are in your hands either because you know or you do not know. And so not knowing is as much as saying to us, you know what, I don't care what happens to all the 30 million of you. And that cannot be right. And I think we need to get really serious. People say I get overly too worked out about these things, but for goodness sake, this is running a country. We have to be serious about it. So yes, that was a part of it that I wasn't impressed with, but there were other questions that I genuinely didn't think he was very strong in responding to. So yeah, him and the fisheries ministry, which is a bit more recent, which is still fresh in people's mind. I won't go into the details of that because
Absolutely.
people have attempted reducing it to a matter of being able to speak English or not, whereas we've all seen it's a matter of clear not having grasp of the issues in the sectors concerned.
Absolutely. Yeah. But anyway, I probably would want to drag you into that mad about whether English, our own CEO over here has written a piece on Facebook, whether it's a measure of, I also believe it's a measure of intelligence, but should it, maybe I shouldn't even ask the question whether it should
I
be
mean, this is
of
a
a
this is a
criteria.
discussion.
What's your take? I mean, if one is able to express himself or herself, that should be enough, right? Or we expect ministers to speak good English as, I don't know, maybe journalists or lawyers or I.
No, I think that is what people want us to believe is the case. This was never about her not being able to speak English. She was speaking English. I
Okay.
mean, we could understand what she was saying. It was largely a matter of having a grasp of issues. But let's also not belittle the English language. You know, we teach in this country in English language.
Absolutely.
It literally means that English language in itself is access to education. I don't think people recognize that. English language is access to education. If you don't understand it, there is no way you can understand every other subject. But beyond that, the point I have often made when this issue had come up since the last 2 days is this: quite simply, look, this is a minister of state that is going to be making laws. We make our laws in English. This is a minister of state that is going to be dealing with foreign businesses as well. They need a common language to engage in. This is a minister of state that is going to be having collaborations with other countries to man our seas and our ports. She needs that collaboration to be done in a universal language. So nobody can stand anywhere and say that English as a measure of competence doesn't come in here. Of course it comes. It runs right through everything she's going to do. So I think we should stop belittling the fact that English is a comprehensive element of expression or diplomacy or lawmaking. It cuts across every one of those.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I think that perhaps the debate is settled right here. I also, largely agree that the issue was not necessarily about her fluency in English. It was more about policy understanding and, you know, grasping of policy. But of course, English is as important as any other thing that you would need to be a successful minister. Great. And what about the committee members, their line of questions? How do you, what's your impression about that also? I mean, I know along the line we did chip in a few things, but generally, what's your impression so far?
I think they've been good. Haruna Atta has been quite impressive. I think there's been times where I don't want it has appeared as though some, the chair has attempted on a few occasions to sort of water down some questions or offer some sort of buffer to the ministers designate, and I wasn't quite impressed with that. I'll be honest about it. Because this is not the time to shield ministers designate. They need to be grilled and grilled right. Like again, I said, it's not a matter of determining whether they know the answers 100%. It's a matter, it's an opportunity being created for them to demonstrate that they have the capability that we can all have confidence in. Having said that, I do think that some of the lines of questions were unnecessary. I do think there's a phenomenal range of areas that we could have still focused on. One of the things that I consistently found missing throughout the entirety was getting ministers to establish concretely, what the intra-ministerial and policy cohesiveness ought to look like with their ministries and other related ministries, and I think that is critical. Now, when the Minister for Lands, I think, was being vetted, he kept referring to this is a multi-ministerial sort of issue, but they never really pinned him down to find out in what way it is going to be an intra-ministerial, issues. And then the other thing I found lacking in most of the questioning was the issue of policy cohesiveness. Are you doing these policy issues you're talking about as an isolated ministry? How does it relate to the other ministries, for example? I'll give you an example. When I had the Minister of, I think it's Labor, being questioned, one of the things I was hoping, or employment, I think it's labor employment.
Labor and employment.
Right. One of the things I kept asking myself, why are they not asking about, what is it called? The African Free Trade African Free Trade Intercontinental, whatever. Yeah, the AFTA. Why is that not a big agenda? Because that has huge implications for our labor market. In fact, we should be asking, how is that you are going to be dealing with labor? How are you intending to work with the Ministry of Education, for example? Because I tell you one thing, as a matter of fact, we knew that AFTA was going to be happening 5 years back, 10 years back even.
True.
By the time it took off, by the time we set up an office here, it should be making part of our curriculum. People who are studying international business in this country, people who are studying labor laws, people who are studying human resources, ought to have been seeing these things factored into their curriculum ASAP. And that will require Ministry of Education, will require Ministry of Labor and Labor and Employment. These are policy coherence issues we needed to be engaging these ministers on. So we know that things are not continuing to happen in isolation, and we do that too much in this country. The Minister for Communication talked about, there is internet in every secondary school. I doubt that. I doubt that. But the Minister of Education was also interviewed, and there was no correlation between the policies that were raised in one with the policies of the other. So it's that, connectivity of policy that I think needed to be, a bit more interrogated. Another thing that I found was missing, largely, was also what the future trends are likely to be, and how they affect, the ministerial positions that they were being vetted for. I watched some of the vetting for the I think it's the Ministry of Interior, um, and I would have loved to see questions around what really are the new threats to our security, because there are new threats that are happening every day, and it is not over the border threats. you know there are new threats evolving every day, and it is not threats about who stowed away into Ghana, or who used Togo routes to enter Ghana. Those are not the new threats. And so I just feel, we had so much scope to raise some really deeper questions, in my view, that would have benefited all of us and our understanding of this designated persons.
All right. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. A few of the messages here. One from Love Christ, Nanifia Trust says, great interview by our standards. Kudos. And then Favor Joy Furiata says, first time listening to your program. Good job. And then KB Bossman says, great show. So I think all too soon we might have to bring the program to an end. Maybe just for a last question. I know we talked about this also, but I just want to raise it back. There are some who have also who have also raised questions. I doubt if it's not relevant, but people are concerned that the questioning has always been on character and the conducts and behavior of people other than their competence or their skills, and so people find it a bit strange, and that the focus has largely be on character other than competence. What's your impression? What's your take on that? Is it really necessary? Some feel that it should not be asked at all.
Oh, I think it should be asked. I think to work at that level, it is not just your competence, it's not just your skill set. A lot has to do with character, because let's not forget, at that level, you're not just an employee, you're a leader. You're leading. You're leading a whole ministry. You're leading citizens who work in that industry. You are leading foreign businesses who are going to come into the country and work in that industry. A foreign person coming into that industry knows not to be corrupt by just taking one look or one listen at the character of the minister in charge of that ministry. So you are in a leadership position, and a lot is going to depend on your character as well. And so there needs to be some of those questions asked. I just don't think that we are doing it well by asking people to apologize for some wrong they did in the past. There's other ways you can question people's character, and whether their character and their temperament is a match for the industry they are looking to head. And so, I don't want to, you know what, I won't give that example. It looks too broad daylight. So,
All right.
but I do think that, those are critical questions to be asked. Look, one of the things I've consistently said, and I will say it here and then I'll end it here, is that I understand committee members wanting to get something out. We've got an awful many professional psychologists in this country. People could have been brought on board to help refine and shape questions that really pull out. We've got occupational human resource people who are specialists who could have helped fine tune some questions in a manner that just by asking it, it doesn't appear intrusive, but it still delivers us finding out whether or not X person or Y person has the right character to man a certain position. And I think that we need to start getting professional with some of these processes, because these are not, and I keep making this reference to see this country as your $64 billion earning company. You would go through the rigor to ensure that you have everything it takes to ask the right questions and get the right responses and determine if you are bringing on board the right people. And I think that professionalism is needed at this stage. This is not a platform purely for appearing to know or appearing to be politically astute. You know, we can do the politics in every other way, but this is about getting people to man positions that we 30 million people are going to depend on for another 4 years.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I would say that this would be all for today. Thank you very much. This has been cebsar Talk, and today our guest has been Honorable Marek Kofi Gane. Thank you very much, sir. And then we hope that we meet again to discuss. My attention has been drawn to ask a question. So maybe just last question, so that this would also be your concluding remark then. What criteria were used to appoint and nominate the minister designates? Wow. I don't know if we've discussed this before, but the question is...
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know, but one thing I can assure you is that they have to be very loyal party person. That one I can guarantee you. I mean,
maybe we would have to pass this question over to the president to ask him what criteria he used.
Yes, we have to. I mean, he has his own criteria. I'm sure I would have used something different.
But for you, what would have been an appropriate criteria? I think along the line you did mention something like that. But for you, what
yes,
would...
I mean, one of the things we did, you know, going into this was that we carved out different criteria for different roles because they had to be very specific to the roles for the most part. So if you take something like education, for example, we're looking at somebody who didn't just understand education, but understood technology, because that is the future of education. We needed somebody who understood the power of collaborative education. In other words, the universities in Ghana and the universities outside, how can we partner and learn from each other and expand our scope of learning? So we needed different people in different positions to have a clear, you know, some clear skills or some clear understanding of certain things that were, you know, success factors for those ministries. If you take the Ministry of Trade, for example, one of the critical success factors is that the person had to understand, you know, intra and intercontinental trading. You can't do away with that because that's the future. And I've been proven right by what AFTA is doing now. And this is something we thought about way before after got inaugurated. So it's different ministries would have had different criteria from the way we drew it.
Interesting perspective out there, and I doubt if this is possible with the political parties. But anyway, so thank you very much once again, Mr. Marek Kofi Gane. Thank you, fellow Cebsarians, those of you who followed. Hopefully next week we'll bring you another interesting discussion. I am Evans Apia Kisi, the host of cebsar Talk. Bye-bye.